Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and welcome to a reading vlog for The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. So I decided that I would not do weekly vlogs during the week of September because a lot of the books that I'm reading are really long and are going to take at least 2 weeks, if not 3 or 4, for me to complete. And I felt like I was just going to be updating you with little snatches of the books and not actually giving you any sort of full picture of like my overall thoughts on the books that I'm reading. So I decided that instead I'm going to do dedicated reading vlogs to at least one of the books that I'm reading this month, maybe several. So like I said, I'm reading The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. I am reading this with my friends Courtney from Courtney Reads and Mitzi from Mitzi Reads and Writes. And we are really enjoying reading this together. Well, I think I'm enjoying it the most so far. So this is a book that takes place in the setting of a monastery, and there is a man named Brother William who has been called to this monastery by someone that he knows. He's been an investigator in the past through like being like an inquisitor basically, and has stopped doing that because he does not like that, which good for him. If you like being an inquisitor, there's obviously something wrong with you. But anyways, he's been called here because there is someone who has died and the situation looks suspicious. So we're getting this viewpoint from the perspective of the young man who is kind of like, I just want to say his apprentice. Like, William of Baskerville is his mentor, and it takes place in the 1300s. And I think this is an order of Franciscan monks. Yeah, so we've got some drama between the Franciscan monks and the Benedictine monks. We've got some drama between the king and the pope excommunicating the king. We've got some historical drama that's happening here that is set up at the beginning. So at the time of starting this vlog, I am a little chunk into it, and so I have the setup for the story essentially. And I really like that it actually starts with an introduction by a person who said, hey, I found this manuscript and I translated it, and it makes it seem like it's like something real, which I really like when books do that. I just think it's really fun. I know that the Scarlet Letter had a similar opening to where someone is like working and ends up finding the manuscript of the Scarlet Letter, and this is the same way where someone finds this manuscript, and I just find that to be a really interesting open, and I really like it. And it enables the author to give historical and cultural context that would feel like info dumpy and like doesn't make sense otherwise. So I think that that is another reason why that works so well for me, is because it really sets the stage for the story, especially a story like this where I'm not really super familiar with the history of the Middle Ages. I've studied it a little bit. I've studied a little bit of church history, but for sure I'm not incredibly well versed in that. And obviously this takes place in a monastery, so there's a lot of Catholic references, and I'm not a Catholic. I am a Christian though, and so I do know some things about Catholicism and some things that are, you know, differing between, you know, Protestant Christianity and Catholicism and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot I don't know about monastic life, and so it's been really interesting. I really like the setting. There has been a lot of philosophical and religious and ethical questions that have been posed so far, and there's been a very large cast being introduced, and so that's really interesting as well, that we have a lot of people that are at this abbey. And so I don't really know where we're going from here, and I know it's going to get a lot more mysterious than it is right now. Right now it just feels like it's very much setting the stage. So we'll kind of see where we go from here, but we've gotten little snippets of William's brilliance and how he solves crimes, and it feels very much like Sherlock Holmes. And so I'm wondering, the fact that his name is William of Baskerville, that's where he's from, because he is English, it just makes me wonder if this was like intentionally a Sherlock nod. So I'm sure I'll see as we go on, but the way that he deduces everything, I was going to say crimes, but he hasn't really been deducing as much about the crimes yet, but there's like a horse that's gone missing from the abbey, and when he comes up, he's like, hey, your horse is missing. He went that way, and he's even able to guess the horse's name and like what he looks like and all that kind of stuff, which is, you know, and he's able to deduce that from the way that the people are acting and also like the prints in the snow of the horse itself. And so it's really really interesting, and I love the way that he solves things like that. So I'm really interested to see how he's going to do with the mystery aspects of it. But I'm really enjoying this so far, and I will be continuing to check in throughout the month of September with what I am thinking of this book. So I don't usually do any vlog updates here. Oftentimes I do it in my bedroom or outside, but I already have everything set up in here because I was recording a video. So I'm just gonna update you on the name of the rose here instead. So I've lost my buddy readers, unfortunately. I'm not really surprised. I can see the name of the rose being kind of a polarizing book because both of them said that the reason they decided not to continue is because they felt like this story, the mystery story, was really being overshadowed by the historical stuff, by the more philosophical and religious conversations, which I went in to this story for those elements. And the mystery is just like an added bonus. I didn't realize that the mystery would really ever take a front seat in this story. I mean, when you read the back, it sounds really exciting, but I knew because I listened to Christy and Victoria talk about this when they read it last year, I had different expectations going in, and I went into it for the historical things, for the philosophical things, for the religious contexts and conversations, and so I'm having a ball. I'm absolutely loving a lot of the kind of apocalyptic and revelation kind of comparisons that are happening. I think that that is so interesting, and that's kind of pointing to this kind of antichrist figure who is the one that is like committing the murders. That's what it says on the back anyway. So there's a lot of conversations about the antichrist and all that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of kind of end times imagery or things that are reminiscent of the book of Revelation. You know, a lot of sculptures that they're seeing, drawings that they're seeing, things that they're seeing in this monastery, and I'm finding that to be such a really interesting and fun connection. I'm now almost halfway through, so I'm like 46, I think, percent of the way through. I'm alternating between audiobook and physical book, mostly physical, but sometimes audio. I've also found a website that translates all the Latin, and so I'm going to include that link down below if you guys choose to read this at some point, because talking to Mitzi and Courtney, none of us have any footnotes in our versions. We may all have the same version. I have like a mass market paperback, so it may be different if you have a nicer version, but there are no footnotes or endnotes or anything translating the Latin that is in this book. And there's a lot of Latin in this book because you're in a monastery in the 1300s. So I found a website that divides the book up into like sections and then like the times of the day that all these different things are taking place, which there is a thing at the beginning of the book for that, which is really helpful because I wasn't really familiar with any of the terms except for Vespers. The rest of it I was not familiar with. And so it has it divided up into like whatever day and then whatever time of day, and then it has each Latin passage with its translation. So I'll link that if that is helpful to anyone else, because for me, I'm just like, sometimes that would be just a phrase where I felt like maybe this isn't as important, but sometimes it would be like a big paragraph and I'm like, what are you saying? What are you talking about? So I wish that the book had footnotes with translations, because I think that that would be better and less disturbing to the flow if it's on the same page as opposed to having to look it up on my phone, but that's okay. I'm still really, really enjoying it. The last part that I read was a conversation between Brother William and Adso about how heresies uprise in the church oftentimes through oppressed peoples or, you know, outcasts or like the other of society. And then there are times where people in the church realize like, oh no, this isn't a heresy, they're right. So what we have to do is we have to somehow convince them that they're wrong so we can take this and add this in and yet still keep them like outside the walls and still shun them and make them other. And so they're talking about people with leprosy, they're talking about people who are crazy, people who, you know, are hermits or homeless, or, you know, any of those kinds of things that are less accepted in society, and how they want to brand everything those people are perpetuating as heresy to make them that much more of an outsider. And I just thought that was a really interesting conversation, and something that you still see in churches sometimes. By churches, I don't necessarily mean individual churches. I just mean like sometimes like a group as a whole, like, or leadership of a group can do that sometimes, which obviously I think that there's been much more of a push in recent days to accept people who have been outsiders and try to, you know, be Jesus to them, because Jesus spent a lot of his time with people who were considered outsiders at the time, and a lot of his criticism was for the religious leaders of the day. So, you know, it's just really interesting conversations that are happening, and I'm really enjoying those. I think that that's really, really fascinating. So anytime something about the mysteries pops up, we're continuing to see the body count rise. And anytime mysteries pop up, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. It's almost like I forget about it in between with all these conversations, but the mystery is becoming a bit more involved. I'm really enjoying the scenes where they're like sneaking around, particularly at night, to try to find some answers and all that kind of stuff. I'm really having a really good time with this book, way more than I expected. I was intrigued when I heard Christy and Victoria talking about it, but you never know with larger books. Sometimes they can feel too long, and I'm halfway and it's not feeling long to me, and I'm still really enjoying it. So I hope that I will continue to, but I am having a great time.
Planning some mad, if not perverse, propositions that would change the very substance of doctrine and would deprive our preaching of all power. What are they? Many asked. Asked.
Hi, it's been a little while since I've updated. I am now 70% through The Name of the Rose, so I'm cooking right along. Not on schedule with the schedule I chose for myself, but we'll totally finish it by the end of the month easily, so that's fine. So I just wanted to update you because a lot has happened since we've last talked, and my opinion of the book has shifted a bit as well. So there are some spoilers here, so you may want to skip the rest of this section if you're worried about spoilers, but at this point in the story, pause so you can skip. We now have, I think, 4 dead bodies at this point. At the right where I stopped, we have our 4th dead body. I was really suspecting Berengar, especially because of some of the drama that was happening with some of the things, and then he turned up dead, so I was surprised because I was kind of suspecting him. Now my suspicion is Malachi, the librarian. So we'll see what happens and see if I'm correct, because I don't know. There are still a lot of things I'm really enjoying about this book. There's some really good humor in here at times. Like there's this old guy who can't eat regular food because he's lost all his teeth, and so he like begs Adso to bring him some chickpeas, and then he's so excited when Adso finally does, and like that was kind of funny. And then there's this misunderstanding about pigs that were truffle hunting, and a whole story with that was really, really funny. And so there have been some moments of humor. There have been a lot of conversations between mentor and mentee that make perfect sense and feel like they're conversations that they would be having about morality and about ethical decisions and about theological things that are being questioned, because there's, you know, a big conversation that happens in this meeting that happens between different sects of monasteries. And so there's been some really interesting conversations that have happened, but at times it's really starting to feel heavy-handed, and it's starting to make the book feel kind of bloated for me. I'm kind of a little over it. I'm like ready to just kind of move past some of that. But my favorite conversation that we've had so far, there was actually a conversation about unicorns, and I'm like, I forgot that at this time period they would have thought that unicorns really existed, and that you catch unicorns by bringing a virgin into the forest, and the unicorn will come lay their head on the virgin's lap, and that's how you catch a unicorn. And I was just like, it was really funny. But then there was this conversation where William is saying to Adso, he's like, you can't believe every single thing that you read in a book. And Adso says, well, aren't books supposed to teach us? Like, then our books just completely, we don't even know whether or not they're trustworthy. And they have this whole conversation about how books aren't intended to necessarily be taken at face value exactly what they're saying. We should be asking, what do they mean by what they're saying, and getting to the deeper meaning of what it is that they're trying to communicate. And that's a better conversation to have. And I really loved that. I really liked that conversation. And that's been a more recent conversation that I've read. So still enjoying some of the conversations that they're having, and still enjoying some of the things. But it's really interesting because this is one of those books where I'm like, oh yeah, this is a classic. I put it on my classics TBR for the year because it's touted as a classic, and it was written in like the 80s. And as you realize it, there's some content in it that makes you realize, like, oh yeah, this isn't super old. For example, and again, this is spoilery, but this should still be in the spoiler section, we've got, you know, this whole thing uncovered with Berengar, like, having homosexual relationships with guys in the monastery because he can't deal with the commitment that he's made to celibacy, so he's gotta, you know, be sexually satisfied somehow. And then we've got Adso, who is like really, you know, he's a young monk and he's being mentored by someone, but he's still like fighting a lot of hormones, I would say. And as a result ends up sleeping with this random girl that's in the kitchen of the monastery and is not even supposed to be there. And then he thinks he's in love with her over and over and over again. It's like all he's talking about, how he's so in love with this girl. I'm like, you barely saw her face by the light of the kitchen fire, and you've said that. Like, this is not love. You don't care about her, really, even if you want what's best for her. Like, this is not a loving relationship. You don't even know her name. And now she's being accused of being a witch because she's been discovered with random animal parts. And the reason she's got these is because she's receiving them from men inside the monastery who are basically paying her with food for her family, so she'll prostitute herself for them. Essentially, that's basically what's happening. And I just didn't expect that, and it's become so much of the story that I'm just like, feel like there's just a lot of it. Not only was I not expecting it at all, but in addition to that, it just feels like we're really going on and on and on, especially about Adso's stuff. Not quite so much about some of the stuff going on with the other monks, but Adso's like obsession with this girl, and his obsession isn't continuing to be physical necessarily, but he really just thinks he's in love with her. And I'm just like, oh, I'm just kind of over that. And it just continues, and it's going to continue because he's probably going to try to free this girl in some way, or just watch her be killed, or I don't know. Like, it's so weird. And I don't know if Echo's just trying to say, hey, you know what, taking a vow of celibacy is a really bad idea. Like, I don't know if that's, like, is that his intention? Is that what he's trying to say here? Because I think that, I'm sure it's fine for plenty of people to take vows of celibacy who are priests or nuns or monks or whatever, but obviously there are people who really should not take vows of celibacy, and I don't know if that's what Echo's trying to say here. Okay, the spoilers are over, so if you skip the spoiler section, just know I'm struggling just a little bit and feeling bogged down with like the level of sexual content that's happening in this book that I wasn't expecting. It's not, nothing is like super like erotica explicit or anything like that. I'm just getting a little weary of it. It feels like it's become more of a focus in the book than it needs to be. So yeah, I just like, it's kind of annoying me just a little bit, but I'm still like really intrigued overall. There's something that Sir William, or Brother William, I mean, says, where he says, you know, we have a daytime abbey and we have a nighttime abbey. There are things that are happening during the day that know nothing of the things that are happening during the night. And so they have to stay up at night and explore areas of the abbey that they're not supposed to be in because there are things that are happening there only at nighttime. And I think that that's really interesting. And I love that phrase. We have a daytime abbey and a nighttime abbey. So I'm really intrigued to see where this is going to continue as far as the mystery is concerned. I don't have a ton left, like 30% left. Like I said, I'm feeling kind of bogged down when I was reading this. I'm like, oh, maybe this could be like 5 stars. Like, this is so enjoyable. I'm really, really liking it. And then some of the stuff, I'm just getting a little bogged down in the weeds with some of the conversations that are happening, some of the really long drawn out discussions, and some of the sexual content. So that's it for this update. I may be back with one more update before the end, or I may just come back at the end. We'll see, but I know I will be back at least one more time to give you my final thoughts. Hi, I did it. I finished The Name of the Rose, and boy oh boy, do I have thoughts for you. I'm going to try to keep this spoiler free because I want to share with you what worked for me and what didn't work for me, so that way you can kind of get an overall picture of what I thought about this book. So yeah, I have, it's very mixed bag for me. It's a very mixed bag. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about what I did like, because there were things that I really, really enjoyed about this book. I liked the first half of the book. I just really, really liked a lot. So first of all, I really liked the historical context and setting that we get in this book. I thought that that was just phenomenal, because I don't know a lot about this time period in history, but I know a little bit, since I do know a little bit of church history, so I had some historical context, but not a ton. And so there is really a chance of setting me up for success, of not feeling lost and not feeling like I don't know what the issues of the day are that are being debated here. Like, they really go over that. So I think that you really do know a lot, and as a result, the setting is really good. The setting at this monastery, and you really feel where you are, and it feels very atmospheric at times when they delve into that. I think that he did such an amazing job with that, and I also really loved the apocalyptic imagery that happens a ton in this book. The Book of Revelation, you see a lot of those symbols, and it ties in very closely with the mystery and the murders that they're trying to figure out what's going on, because they discover pretty quickly in that a lot of the bodies and the murders are tying in with different trumpets that are happening during the judgment in Revelation. And so those correlations were super interesting, and I really thought that he did a good job of them studying different art and things that are here. And we have copyists and scribes who are doing the art in the margins of these books that they're copying, and there's a lot of like disturbing apocalyptic imagery that really just helps set the scene and helps you kind of feel the narrator, Adso, feel his unsettling feelings that he's feeling, and how the fear that he's feeling as he's tying these things together. I also really loved the discussions between Brother William and Adso. So Brother William is Adso's mentor, and there's a lot of discussions they have about some sort of moral and ethical things and debates that are happening within the church that feel entirely appropriate for a mentor to be having with his mentee. So I feel like that went really well, and some of their conversations were the discussions that I enjoyed the most in this book. Lastly, I have kind of as a thing I liked and didn't like the resolution of this story. I thought that kind of the whodunit part and the revelation of who it was that is behind this, the way that all these things were orchestrated, I thought was really interesting, and I really liked the explanation of all that and how all that tied in, and how William figured all of that out, because like I said, he's very Sherlock in the way that he thinks, and I find that really, really interesting. I really liked that aspect. However, there were things to the resolution that I didn't like that felt a little bit over the top and ridiculous to me, particularly the way that they tied it in with some of the heretical beliefs that were being persecuted. I mean, there's a lot of conversations there about different sects of monks who are believing different things. I mean, you've got those that believe that it's wrong for you to own any physical possessions at all, versus those who think that physical possessions and wealth are a tool to be used. And you've got those factions warring against each other, each one calling the other one complete heresy, which feels like a bit of an over-exaggeration. And then you've got like this whole long conversation that happens multiple times as to whether or not Jesus laughed and whether laughter is from God or from the devil, and each side thinking the other one's heretical. To say that some of these conversations felt long and bloated and dragged out is the overstatement of the year. Let me just tell you, there are times where the conversations go on and on and on, and you're like, how is this relevant? And I feel like he tried to tie it into the ending, and the way that he tied it in just didn't work for me. I was just like, this book just felt entirely bloated. I don't understand really the statement that he was trying to make in this, because it feels like there is like this overarching theme of sexuality that's in this book, and it feels incredibly pervasive, which is what I said in my last update, is I just felt like the amount of time that we spent on sex and sexual thoughts and sexual desires and sexual urges just felt so overblown, and it just made me wonder, like, what was the point of including all this in here? Is it to show that, you know, sexual repression is bad, and that, you know, people should not be making vows of celibacy to the church? Like, is that part of the point he's trying to make? Because it feels like that in some ways, but I don't know if he's just trying to accurately portray the struggle of someone who has taken a vow of celibacy. But then it's also shown certain people who break their vows of celibacy, and it's not really seeming like it's a huge deal, which is also weird, because I feel like in the church they would think that's a big deal in a monastery, but apparently not. And I don't know if that's him just trying to say like, oh, boys will be boys. But then there's also a huge conversation being had about what is ultimate truth. How do you find the truth? What does that mean? And there's a struggle even with people who are really smart and think that they know how to find the truth, who are just floored with the times that they're wrong, and seeing that they're wrong, and they're like, can you actually ever find ultimate truth and ultimate morality? Is that even a thing? And so is he criticizing the belief that there is moral truth, that you can find ultimate truth? Or is he just exploring the quest for truth and how frustrating that can be when you feel like you're on different sides of this? And so I don't really know what his point was. In my conversation with Christy, she was talking about how the symbolism that's in this book is also one of the points, is that symbols and symbolism leads us to the truth. And so I don't know. I don't really know exactly the whole point he was trying to make here, because it feels so muddled in all these long conversations. Also, this is not spoilery, I don't think, because I'm not going to go into details, but there is like a fever dream towards the end of this book that is like insane. Like, it just further dwells on sexuality even more to a really weird degree. And it's really interesting how casually torture and maiming someone's body and martyrdom is mentioned. And maybe it's because it was normal for people to be burned at the stake for heresy, but it talks about, you know, chopping off various parts of their bodies in a sentence that's just like, this is normal, but it takes you so off guard, and it's kind of disturbing. And I like fever dreams in books sometimes. I want to be careful I say like, because yeah, they're fever dreams and they're weird, but like, people talk about the fever dream in Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, and that dream has nothing on this one. Let me just tell you, in terms of the weirdness, in terms of the darkness, in terms of the what the heckness, like, it has nothing on that. And I've also read The Master and Margarita, which the second half of that book entirely feels like a fever dream, and pretty much is. And so it's like, I can do fever dreams in books and see their purpose and understand. And this was just like the weirdest thing that I've ever read. So that leads me to kind of like, how do I feel about this book overall? Because like I said, it's a mixed bag, and I've just explained that to you. Overall, I would say that I land kind of in the middling ground for this one, where the first part of the book was really good. I was really enjoying it, but it ended up just feeling so bloated and long-winded. Like it could have been half the length. No joke. This is like a 600-page book. It could have been 300 pages, probably less, and still included a lot of the historical richness and context, still included a lot of the really great conversations between William and Adso and the debate between church leaders that are also happening in this book. I mean, even 400 pages wouldn't have felt nearly as bloated as 600 pages. There are times where we just go on and on and on and on, and it just feels like a lot. That being said, I know that Echo has other books that are shorter than this, that are set in similar time frames and stuff. So I'm not done with him. I'm going to read more of him. I can see why people would enjoy this book. I can see why people would recommend this book. I can see why people would enjoy a lot of the conversations that are fostered in this book. I really liked a lot of them, and I felt like they were deep and made good points and were meaningful and stuff. And so there were a lot of things that I really did enjoy about this. But I also just felt like the sexual content really just swallowed up the last half of the book. It felt like it was mostly about that we were so in the head of our narrator, who was so focused on sexual urges and desires, that it felt like that was all we were getting. Which, to be totally honest, is kind of frustrating, because I feel like I really enjoyed his writing for the most part. It just felt like this weird fixation, which is why I'm like, is that the point that he's trying to make? Because it felt like that just swallowed up the second half of the book so entirely that the rest of it didn't seem to matter. It's like I would forget that there was a mystery that they were even trying to solve, because it felt so bloated, and we go so long without anything even remotely relating to the mystery or relating to deaths. And it felt like Adso would just completely forget that there are people dying around him and a threat of more people dying and more things going on, because he was just so consumed with his own sexual urges that it was just like, I don't know. It wasn't particularly like super graphic. It wasn't really like smutty for the most part. I mean, I think that there were a couple little spots that were kind of graphic, but they weren't like things that you would read nowadays, and they didn't feel titillating at all. But it just still felt so heavy-handed and overbearing. Like it kind of felt like a teenage boy wrote it at times, I guess. And I guess Adso, is he supposed to be a teenager? Maybe. Teenager, young man. Just felt like that was all he was thinking about for a while. But anyways, those are my thoughts on the book. I'm really glad I did this vlog style, because I'm able to share a lot more of my thoughts with you, which is really nice, because this took up a lot of my reading month in September. First of all, because it is 600 pages, but also it took me 3 weeks to read this book. So I'm really glad that I was able to share it with you in this format and kind of fill you in as I go. And I'd love to hear your thoughts too if you've read this book. Would love to hear what you thought of it, or if you haven't read this book, is it one that maybe you'd be interested in? I don't want to steer people off, because there are a lot of good things and a lot of things to like about it, but I'm really interested to read more of Echo's shorter works to kind of see what kind of feel they have. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.